Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and to those in the chamber, our guests in the public gallery and those watching online. It's now shortly after 1900 hours on Tuesday, the 7th of September, sorry, 7th of July. And we are about to start this evening's cabinet meeting. So, agenda item 1. I'd like to mention that there are no fire drills planned for this evening. If the fire alarm is activated, which is a continuous siren with flashing red light, please leave the building immediately and follow the fire exit signs. Are there any apologies for absence and/or substitutions?
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies for absence from Councillor Maskell.
Thank you very much. Item 1 on the agenda, the minutes, to agree the minutes of the meeting of the committee held on the 16th of June 2026 as a correct record. I'll be happy with those minutes. That's fine. Thank you very much. Item 2, declarations of interest. Any interest not already registered? As I suspected. Thank you. Agenda item 3 this evening, questions from members. I'll remind members that there is a maximum time limit of 15 minutes. The hands are up already. And I will take the questions in the order that I saw the hands. So it will be Councillor Clayton, Councillor Skinner, Councillor Grint, Councillor Gustard.
Thank you, Chairman. My question is, why has the Council taken such a generous and I would argue reckless approach to the definition of grey belt in identifying potential sites for development? For example, around Sevenoaks, the area adjoining the Site of Special Scientific Interest and National Landscape at Knoll Park plays an important role in protecting both views across the Dartmouth Valley and local wildlife. And the area north of the SSSI at Sevenoaks Nature Reserve is extensively used by migrating birds in the reserve, while also protecting views to the North Downs towards Otford and Shoreham. And I can't understand why these areas have been given effectively carte blanche for development.
Thank you for the question. I'm not entirely sure I agree with your opening to that question. Quite blunt and I think is almost disrespectful to the experience and professionalism of the officers who make those decisions. Councillor Williams, would you like to offer any words to answer Councillor Clayton?
Yes, thanks very much indeed. I agree with your sentiments actually to an extent. We have to take our lead from Arup. They are the experts, and that's really the end of it. They've done a deep dive into this, and we have to take leads from experts. That's the long and the short of it, really. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Skinner.
Thank you. At the recent DIAC meeting, the vote on the local plan was split 6-6. The 6 who voted for the local plan were all either cabinet members or deputy cabinet members. The 6 who voted against were all outside the executive. The chair's casting vote was used to carry the recommendation. Could you explain how Cabinet assures to the Council that advisory committees are operating as genuinely consultative cross-party policy development bodies rather than executive-dominated forums? And secondly, what safeguards are in place to ensure that the advice of advisory committees reflects the full range of member views? Thank you.
Councillor Skinner, thank you for the question. You'll be aware, of course, sitting on the committees that you do and your colleagues, that we have spread the load across all parties. There are rules, of course, that you'll be aware of, that if you sit on particular committees, you're not allowed to sit on other committees and vice versa. So the ability to identify or to split people is somewhat restricted. I don't think that we have had a problem in the past through any of the advisory committees. In fact, they're all, as you know yourself, they're quite collegiate, they're quite open. They're not particularly political. In fact, I think it's only really full council that really becomes political. They are actually quite good environments for open discussion, where people are encouraged to participate and come up with their views in an open forum. And it's precisely that environment that we engender to bring that report to Cabinet. Not all Cabinet members will attend the advisory committees or DIAC. They will rely either on going back over the footage or on the papers that are presented to them. We want to ensure that the Cabinet members are presented with a fair and accurate resume of that evening, and that resume has been basically created as a result of open conversation. I don't know if any Cabinet member would like to pick up on any points, if you feel I've missed anything. Councillor Williams.
Yeah, just very briefly again. I'm not the longest serving Cabinet member or indeed member of this district council, but never once have we been whipped in to vote one way or another. I've never seen it ever in my time here. So, it's just one of those things. It was even, and the chairman casted vote, which is legal and fair. Well, it's legal. I guess some people won't think it's fair, but that's the way it is. But we're certainly not whipped into anything. I don't know what the opposition parties do, but we have a free vote on everything we do. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'm not entirely sure, forgive me if I'm wrong, Councillor Skinner, I'm not entirely sure that your assessment that all the people who voted for were Cabinet members or deputy Cabinet members.
I checked quite carefully, and I believe I'm right. And there is a strong sense of the Cabinet asking for support for its policies from the advisory committees, rather than looking to get a balanced view as a result of full debate coming through. And indeed, it was quite striking that where something as contentious as this came forward, a casting vote was used in order that an apparently
sorry, Councillor, sorry to interrupt you, because I generally do enjoy listening to you in meetings at full council. You always bring something to the table which is worth listening to. But is there a question coming from this, or are you just sort of giving a resume of the DIAC meeting?
I'm trying to express my concern about the way that DIAC functioned and asking whether or not the Cabinet are absolutely comfortable with the decision making that took place.
Thank you for your comment. It's noted. I've given a reply to your initial part of the question. Thank you. Councillor Grint.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I want to ask about the position of Broke Hill within the local plan. Now, my views on the inclusion of Broke Hill in the local plan are well known, that I'm vehemently opposed to its inclusion, but I'm not going to ask about that specifically. I have explored with the officers from planning policy as to what does it mean to have Broke Hill included in the local plan in a special category called pending stroke provisional. And we had a very constructive discussion, and I gleaned from that various things, such as Broke Hill was included in order to ensure that we had numbers in our local plan, which gets as close as we can to satisfying central government. But beyond that, it was made clear to me that this category of pending stroke provisional is entirely down to the fact that there is a live planning application for development at Broke Hill currently sitting with the district council, which I believe is likely to be determined possibly sometime in August. And therefore it was important that the plan should reflect this fact, the status being of a pending planning application, and it's important that the district council doesn't express a view either in support of or against that planning application in order not to predetermine the council's position when it gets. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought for the moment. I was saying it was very important that the plan makes clear that the district council is, if you like, sitting on the fence in regard to that planning application, neither supporting nor rejecting it at this stage. The time for either supporting it or rejecting it will come at the Development Management Committee in due course. I wish to make sure that the plan fully recognises that, and that all references to Broke Hill within the plan recognise that the council is neither supporting or against it. And I just want to get your reassurance that the plan will include those reassurances.
Councillor Green, thank you for your question. I'm glad to see that you have linked in with the planning officers and had those conversations already. I'm going to ask Councillor Horwood if he would like to give it, and then I will follow up with an answer to you as well.
Thank you, Chairman. It was actually going to be one of the questions I asked the officers to also clarify this. I think it's very important that we hear it impartially, as to the status of that site. So if Councillor Grint is willing, I have it as a list of questions that I want to raise later with officers so that he and others can hear directly from the planning officers about the status of that pending and the consequences of it in that pending category, and what that would mean if it were approved or if it were rejected for its inclusion and future in the local plan.
And so thank you, Councillor Green. I think it would be useful to get that explanation and definition through the conversation that we are about to have. And I think I'm fairly clear that that you're right, that the that STC should not suggest that we're either for or against the application. It's in a planning application stage. That we can't be predetermined, and no doubt the application is being looked at the moment by the officers involved. So it will be treated as per any planning application without fear or favour. Thank you, and thank you for being so patient. Last but not least, perhaps, Councillor Gustard.
Thank you, Chair. The local plan proposes an exceptionally large increase in the number of homes in the Sevenoaks urban area, which will inevitably result in much bigger demands on the town centre. Will the council publish the assessments it has made, but not shared to date, of the withdrawal of over 300 parking spaces at Buckhurst and Suffolk Way to make room for these homes? And will it consult town centre businesses who are concerned at the impact of their customers and staff? Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to think that consultation and discussion carries on anyway. You've caught me at a bit of a disadvantage, so I'd like to take that away and check with the relevant officers to find out how that discussion, how that communication will be enacted. You're right. If with the local plan, should the sites come to fruition, there is obviously opportunity for there to be a change in the traffic flow in and through Sevenoaks town, and with that, the parking spaces. I know that from DIAC, and this is something that may come out through conversation this evening anyway, a lot of modelling has gone on in relation to highways, but leave that with me and I'll send a written reply back to you in due course. Okay, I see no other hands, so. Councillor Shay, do apologise, sorry.
It's quite all right. I was trying to figure out what time you started and what time we're finishing. Thank you for the opportunity. Sevenoaks, Swanley and Edenbridge are all identified as centres for major development, and the town councils are named in the infrastructure development plan as leaders for cultural and community infrastructure. But the proposals mean for the changes to SIL mean that those councils will get nothing from developer levies on sites with 10 or more homes to allow them to invest. And the projects they're nominated to lead are given a low priority rating infrastructure development plan. So it seems that they'd be unlikely to be developed or funded by a new unitary. How are the town councils expected to perform that role given to them in the plan without them also receiving the SIL money to allow them to deliver? Thank you.
Councillor Shay, thank you for the question. Councillor Williams, would you like to offer
Yep.
an initial answer?
Yep, it's a complex one. As I always say, a very good question, a very well thought out question, needs a very well thought out answer, and I'll be right back to you on it, okay? I had no, be honestly, I had no idea that they'd be disadvantaged, and they should not be.
I'd be very happy to chat it through with you.
Brilliant. Okay, cheers.
And members, thank you for the questions. That concludes the just over 15 minutes of questions, about interesting questions, and thank you. So we now move on to agenda item 4. Matters referred from Council, Audit Committee, Scrutiny Committee, SIL Spending Board or Cabinet Advisory Committees, if any.
There are none.
Thank you. Agenda item 5, Sevenoaks Local Plan Regulation 19 consultation. I will, Councillor William, would you like to introduce, or would you like me to ask the officer to give her a report first?
No, I'll just start the ball rolling, if you don't mind. Very,
No,
very briefly, of
thank you.
course. Yes. Good evening, members, and as always, a very warm welcome to all of those joining us in the gallery. I'm sorry I can't face you. As I've said before, plan making is hard. It's extremely hard and almost always unpopular. We have had imposed upon us by a central government who sit unchallenged above us an increase in our original planning targets of a massive 63%. They have instructed us to build some 17,500 units within the next 15 years. This is the equivalent of building the size of 2.5 Swanley towns. Swanley is the second largest town in our district by far, demonstrating the size of the challenge imposed upon us. We, at an early stage, protested to the then minister about the difficulties and hardships involved in this, but were rebuffed on both occasions. I hear from those of us who are rightly concerned and some outraged saying, why don't we just not pass the plan 2042 or simply delay it? In my view, this would be a huge mistake. I have written proof, which I've sent around to many people now, that councils who the government suspects will not progress the local plans to the timescales and numbers dictated have received written notices that the government will seek to take control of the process. This would be horrendous for Sevenoaks area and its people. It would leave us as a district with minimal control over sites, no control over vitally important and much needed infrastructure, and no control over the design excellence of potential developments. We would have potentially minimal say over the development of much needed unified public transport structure. If we lose control, the controlled planning process could be put back years. The tilted balance scenario still in play, allowing even more applications to flood forward in an uncontrolled way. It is important to note that approximately 550 sites were put up for development by landowners, while only about 100 sites made it to Reg 19. Many of the developers rejected may still want to build. As a council, we simply must keep control of developments we have to keep back the potential flood of uncontrolled applications that would come forward in an uncontrolled way. We have to avoid planning by appeal. As a local government, we will be able to secure sympathetic, localised planning conditions in developments as opposed to the heavy hand of the national government sitting in Whitehall. We cannot escape the fact that this government has virtually abolished our greenbelt protections for large parts of our beautiful district. Where development was once strongly prohibited in national planning policy, it is now actively encouraged by national planning laws and housing targets enforced by the government. The plan we have before us tonight encroaches on approximately only 2% of our greenbelt, protecting some 98% of it. You will know, or you will all know, my passion for the delivery of meaningful infrastructure, not simply to support planned growth, but crucially to improve the lives of those in our existing communities. Infrastructure underpins everything. We do not want developments to progress, then wait for a first-class infrastructure to somehow just catch up. From now on, we all have to insist that quality infrastructure, utilities, especially water supply and safe sewage treatment and disposal, schools, medical centres, health centres, roads, junctions, to name but a few, are all central to our plans and are not just an afterthought. This juncture of the progress is not the end of the road. We should progress through Reg 19. Should we progress through Reg 19, our public will have an opportunity to lodge their concerns directly with the inspector, who will look at them all. Our public can ask for consideration by the inspector to attend his hearings with a possibility of speaking in them. The process is not a tsunami of buildings. The process is over 15 years. For the people of Sevenoaks to have much say in the process as possible, we need to keep control of it. Thank you.
Councillor Williams, thank you for that introduction, which probably lays the land for the ensuing conversation on what is a very, very important, very emotional topic, and one probably the most important decisions that any council has to come to, the introduction of their latest incarnation of the local plan. So with that, Hannah, are you happy to lead into the debate?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So I'm going to take you through a very brief overview of why it's important that we have a plan, the timetable, what the Regulation 19 publication actually means, the tests of soundness, and then the next steps. So firstly, why do we need to have an up-to-date plan? An up-to-date plan is essential because it provides certainty for residents and communities about where development will and will not take place, giving a clear and transparent framework for future growth. Progressing a plan will help provide housing for future generations, affordable housing, accommodation for older people, and will also provide authorised gypsy and traveller pitches, which in turn will help us resist unauthorised development. As Councillor Williams has said, it sets out strategic infrastructure required to support growth, ensuring that new homes and jobs are accompanied by the necessary investment in transport, schools, health and other services and facilities. It will enable the council to coordinate future growth before local government reorganisation occurs, resist speculative development in the Greenbelt, and also reduce the risk of government intervention. Having an adopted plan gives the council strong grounds to resist inappropriate development, that could be housing, employment, or indeed gypsy and traveller sites, also including speculative or emission sites proposals, by demonstrating that housing and infrastructure needs are being met in a planned, coordinated and evidence-based way. We now have spent considerable time and money getting an up-to-date evidence base in place, and it would be unfortunate not to proceed and use this evidence base. Not having a plan could expose the council to government intervention, losing control over what development happens where, with decisions taken out of the council's hands. It would leave the district vulnerable to years of speculative, uncoordinated development proposals, particularly for housing and gypsy and traveller pitches in the Greenbelt. Without an up-to-date local plan and policies to defend decisions at appeal, the council would lose its ability to shape future development in the district, weakening its position at planning appeals and inquiries. So then moving on to our timetable, the local development scheme, which is the timetable for the local plan as it's formally known. The good news is that we're on track to publish the local plan this summer, which is the regulation 19 stage or publication. And this is set out in paragraph 2 of your reports on page 20. So subject obviously to cabinet agreement, we would hope to publish the plan for 8 weeks this summer, running from the 23rd of July through to the 17th of September. It's been extended by 2 weeks to cover because it covers the summer holiday period. Then we would need to submit the plan by the end of the year for examination in 2027 and hopefully then adopted to be used as an adopted local plan in 2028. There's little scope for agility or flexibility in this programme. We do need to submit by the end of the year because, as you may be aware, the local plan system is changing and there's a new way of producing local plans coming in next year. When we had an advisory visit with PINS, the Planning Inspectorate, they suggested that we need a minimum of 3 months turnaround time from the end of the Reg 19 publication to submission. So if we're finishing that period mid-September, obviously that takes us through to mid-December. So it is relatively tight. So then moving on to what the Regulation 19 publication actually means. Essentially, we are publishing a final draft of the plan, which we hope then to submit to the inspector at Christmas. The requirements of Regulation 19 stage are publishing the plan and making the documents available. We then package up any representations that are received, and these go directly to the inspector. But we do have to ask a set of prescribed questions about whether the plan is sound, I'll come on to what that means in a minute, and legally compliant. And then people, if they think the plan is not sound or not legally compliant, they then have to suggest modifications. So we do need to be clear that this isn't a consultation period. It's not like the Regulation 18 before Christmas. We are publishing the plan and asking a set of prescribed questions. But it is important that people do engage at this Reg 19 stage, because if you want to be involved at the examination next year, you do have to make representations at Reg 19. So in terms of what the tests of soundness are, these are what the inspector's looking at the examination and testing our plan against. And these are set out at paragraph 10 of your report on page 21. There are 4 tests of soundness set out in the NPPF. So the inspector is checking, is the plan positively prepared? So does it meet our headline needs? And as we've mentioned, there's a 17,500 homes over the 15-year plan period, 40,400 square metres of employment space and 192 gypsy and traveller pitches. And then second test of soundness, is the plan justified? So does it provide an appropriate strategy for meeting need? Previous iterations of the NPPF said the appropriate strategy, but there's now recognition that there may be several ways of providing a strategy to meet need. So it just needs to be an appropriate strategy. The third test is the plan effective? So is it deliverable? Can these sites come forwards? Are the policies set out in the plan deliverable? And fourth, is the plan consistent with national policy, i.e. is it consistent with the NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework? So then moving on to our next steps, we have considered all the representations received at Reg 18, and we brought a report to DIAC, Development and Infrastructure Advisory Committee, in March, setting out all the representations that we'd received on policies, on sites, and the evidence base. And all those representations have assisted in the preparation of this Reg 19 plan. So just to reiterate, the recommendation is that the Reg 19 publication, as I said, would run for 8 weeks from the 23rd of July through to the 17th of September, then to follow submission of the plan to the inspectorate at Christmas for examination next year. Thank you.
Anna, thank you very much. And I appreciate you've probably had to work quite hard just to condense all the information regarding the local plan into that resume. So I think it gives a good overview for the committee this evening. Colleagues, are there any questions or comments? Councillor Roy, would you like to?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to make a few sort of opening remarks before we begin questions and the debate, if I may. To say that public feeling on the scale of development proposed is powerful, clear, and deeply felt. And my cabinet colleagues and I fully recognise that strength of feeling. I have consistently raised concerns about the proposed allocations in my ward and ensured residents' views are represented throughout this process. As you will know, I am chairman of Otford Parish Council, and that council has objected to the local site allocations that impact the village in the strongest possible terms. This council has already challenged the government's mandatory housing target and the expectation that Greenbelt land must be released to meet must be released to meet government targets. We have written to government ministers to oppose both. Our objections have been dismissed, and instead we have been warned that if we do not submit a plan, government will take over the process, removing the voice of both this council and our residents. In recent weeks, councillors have faced intense pressure from protest groups and residents, many in my own ward and here this evening, pressing councillors to vote against publishing Regulation 19 this evening. I thank those who have expressed their views respectfully. The stance being urged upon councillors by protest groups and opposition members of this council provides no credible alternative route and overlooks the very real consequences of having no plan. Those consequences are serious. Voting against publication would deny residents the right to make representations directly to the planning inspector, the very person who will ultimately decide what is sound. It would also remove next year's public hearings entirely, meaning our residents and community groups would have no opportunity to raise their concerns to make the case for amendments to the site allocations. It is inconceivable to me that we would choose to silence our own residents. Having no plan is the worst possible option. It leaves the district exposed, removes our residents' voice, and risks handing control to government. My greatest concern is that these groups are not making it clear that stopping the local plan will not stop development. Will not stop development. I can't say it more clearly. Sites we have deliberately excluded from Regulation 19, also in the Greenbelt, and for Otford residents present, that includes Sydney Gardens, are already coming forward or planning to come forward through the planning process. Without an adopted plan, the planning balance tilts sharply towards development, including speculative and omission sites, as my colleague has already outlined. An adopted plan gives us the legal strength to resist inappropriate schemes. We can as we can demonstrate that housing and infrastructure needs are being met in a planned, considered and evidence-based way. Without it, the district is exposed to years of speculative, uncoordinated development, including for gypsy and traveller pitches, with developers able to exploit policy gaps. The most serious risk, and one not being acknowledged by these groups, is direct government intervention. National policy is clear. We are expected to meet the housing target in full. There is no choice on this. Government has confirmed this to us in writing. And as my colleague has said, we have the letter from the ministry is available if members of the public would like to see it. If we fail to progress a plan, government can and will step in, and local control of what gets built and where will be lost entirely. Recent interventions elsewhere demonstrate this is not theoretical. It is a real and serious threat to the district. As Stockport Council, Three Rivers District Council and Castle Point Borough Council have already experienced. But for these reasons, publishing Regulation 19 is the only option that allows this council to protect the public interest and safeguard the future of the district. This is not an easy decision, and it is not one any councillor takes lightly, but leadership requires us to confront difficult realities honestly and to act in a way that protects the long-term interests of this district. Publishing Regulation 19 allows us to do exactly that, to safeguard local control, to ensure our residents' voices are heard, and to give our communities the strongest possible defence against unplanned and inappropriate development. Thank you.
Councillor Roy, thank you. It's quite a powerful statement from that, or from the officers. President, were there any questions that you would wish to raise at this stage, or are you happy to hang on and see how the debate develops?
Yeah, I will just ask one question straight away if I may. Another benefit that I've learnt over the sort of coming days is the benefits of having the local plan once it's submitted. So once we submit it to government at the end of this year, that will straight away kick in the benefits of having a local plan, and you know, help us to, because we haven't had a local plan for a long time, and we are constantly at the mercy of the tilted balance and not being able to object to inappropriate development. It happens all the time in my ward, and as many of us, as all of us will know. So my understanding is the benefits of having that adopted, the adopted plan would begin to kick in almost immediately. Just would be useful to have that clarified for others. Thank you.
No, thank you for making those comments, just to underline a point. Any other colleague? Oh, Hannah, sorry, I do apologise.
No, I was just going to clarify. Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So once a plan is submitted for examination, it starts to gain weight in planning decisions, albeit it is limited to start with. But as you progress to the hearings, and then there's obviously debate on particular sites and policies, particularly any sites and policies that are uncontroversial, certainly gain more weight. Then post the hearings, there is usually a main modifications consultation. And at that point, the inspectors clearly expressed a view on particular matters. So again, the plan gains more weight, and then obviously then it's adopted and it has full weight. So yes, throughout the sort of plan making process, the plan starts to gain weight in decision making, even though it is obviously not yet adopted at that point.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Dybel.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone, and thank you to the members of the public who are up in the public gallery behind me, and also to those watching this meeting on YouTube. I'm probably going to replicate some of what my colleague Councillor Roy has said, and I apologise for that, but here we go. So the Sevenoaks local plan has generated a great deal of discussion, and for many residents, genuine concern and indeed anger. When people hear the figure of 17,460 homes, it sounds positively overwhelming. And it's understandable that people worry about what that number of new homes could mean for our towns, villages and hamlets, and the effect of the developments will have on our roads, schools, healthcare, utilities and countryside. I'm genuinely concerned about what it will mean for our district too, and that is why I'm minded to vote the way I will later on this agenda item. That figure of 17,460 is not a proposal to build that number of homes overnight, we know that, or even within the next few years. It's the government's mandatory housing requirement for Sevenoaks over the entire lifetime of the emerging local plan, extending to 2042. And that means housing, much needed in our district, let's be honest about that, will come forward gradually over many years. Realistically, development is expected to be phased, with some of the larger sites being built out in stages as infrastructure is delivered, planning permissions are granted and market demands allow. Some sites may begin early in the plan period, whilst others may not come forward until much, much later. And the local plan is about preparing for the future, planning ahead, and subject to independent examination, as we've heard, before it can be adopted, ensuring that it is both sound and evidence-based. By having that local plan, we have far more control to shape those future developments and seek the infrastructure our communities need, together with contributions towards the schools, healthcare, transport improvements, open spaces and community facilities, to ensure that growth is managed responsibly, is sustainable, and with the appropriate infrastructure to support our communities. Supporting the local plan does not mean supporting uncontrolled development. It means choosing to manage the growth rather than having it imposed upon us. And without an up-to-date local plan, we have heard that we become incredibly vulnerable to speculative planning applications, with decisions increasingly made on appeal by those based far away from our district. Those of us who live in and with links to the district recognise that Sevenoaks is a special place. Our villages, historic towns and countryside are valued by everyone who lives, works and visits here. And that's why every proposed site must go through detailed planning scrutiny, including assessments of environmental impacts, transport, flood risk, heritage and infrastructure. And we have to remember that these are sites that have been put forward by the landowners in the call for sites, not selected by Sevenoaks District Council. Most importantly, this is a conversation about the future of our district. Meeting housing needs is not simply about numbers. It is about supporting thriving, balanced communities. I appreciate that not everyone will agree with every aspect of the plan, but I hope now it has been made clear that a local plan is the only option we have, rather than allowing decisions about Sevenoaks' future to be made without one. And by supporting the local plan, we're not simply planning for new homes. We are planning for the future of Sevenoaks in a way that seeks to balance the need for growth with the protection of the places we all cherish. Supporting this plan means protecting Sevenoaks, guiding growth responsibly with a whole raft of placemaking policies underpinning it, and shaping its future on our own terms. Thank you.
Councillor Dybel, thank you. And again, I'll offer the same courtesy to yourself. Thank you for relaying your thoughts and observations. Do you, at the moment, have any questions of the officer, or are you happy to wait to the debate section?
Yes, I have got one question actually for Hannah. Hannah mentioned the Gypsy and Traveller sites in her brief overview, and it's 192 pitches. I'm correct. We've had quite a few that have already been approved recently. So where are we now with the numbers, Hannah, on that? We've approved quite a few, haven't we now?
Yes, my apologies. Emma, would you like to take that question?
Yes, thank you. So we've recently updated our Gypsy and Traveller accommodation assessments in 2025, so just before the Regulation 18 last year. That saw a very significant increase in our Gypsy and Traveller needs, up to 192 pitches. The Gypsy and Traveller accommodation assessment sets out a number of recommendations on how to meet that supply, which then leaves us with a residual need which we're expected to meet through the local plan. Those recommendations include potential household dissolution on publicly owned sites, turnover on council-owned pitches, and potential pitches on existing sites for intensification or for regularisation. We've also had 19 pitches granted since July 2025, so since the GTAA was completed. So that brings our residual need down to 62 pitches. And you'll see on page 112 of your reports pack There are 6 sites proposed at policy GT1 to meet that. That includes 38 pitches across sites specifically promoted for gypsy and traveller use. And then also 2 sites of a mixed use, more strategic scale for potential public pitches to come forward later on in the plan period. That decision would be for a future unitary authority as to who would manage those pitches and the way that they come forwards. And just to note that since this report has been published, there has been a slight change in those numbers. It's actually now 24 pitches that are proposed on those strategic sites, because members of Development Management Committee will know there was an 8-pitch scheme granted a couple of weeks ago.
Super, thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Councillor Thornton.
Thank you, Chair, and forgive me if I remain seated. Tonight we have in front of us probably one of the most difficult decisions that any of us on this Cabinet front bench will have had to make in our time as SDC councillors. Over the last few months, like my Cabinet colleagues, I've received hundreds of emails, attended public meetings and spoken to countless residents. I've listened to people who are genuinely frightened about the future of the places that they love. And I've seen the marches, I've read the banners accusing us of failing our communities, and I do completely understand why people feel so passionately. But understanding those concerns does not change the reality of the position that we find ourselves in. This local plan has been at least 10 years in the making, and during that time the planning system has changed repeatedly. Most significantly, the current government has dramatically increased mandatory housing targets and introduced new national planning policies, including the concept of grey belt, fundamentally changing the context in which councils like ours must prepare local plans. We are no longer operating under the planning system that existed when much of this work first began. And I want residents watching and listening tonight to understand one thing above all else, and that is that none of us are voting because we want to see Greenbelt being developed. We are voting because, under the national planning framework established by the current government, we have a duty to produce a sound local plan that meets the mandatory housing requirements set out for our district in full. Doing nothing is not just a neutral option. If we fail to progress this plan on the current timetable, we remain exposed for longer to speculative development under the tilted balance, with developers bringing forward sites individually, often with far less opportunity for us to secure coordinated infrastructure or shape where growth takes place. And if we ultimately fail to produce a local plan, the consequence is not that development disappears. The consequence is that decisions are increasingly taken out of local hands, with government intervention becoming a very real possibility. So tonight is not a choice between development and no development. It is a choice between planned development shaped locally or development shaped for us by others. I also think it's important to address a number of misconceptions. Firstly, the sites before us tonight, as someone actually has already mentioned, were not selected by Sevenoaks District Council. They were promoted by landowners through the call for site process. Officers have then spent, in some cases, years assessing these submissions against planning policy, technical evidence, and sustainability considerations before arriving at the proposals before us this evening. And don't forget, we've been through 3 separate Regulation 18s up to this point. Secondly, these recommendations are not the work of politicians sitting around deciding which villages should grow. They are the product of experienced professional planning officers, supported by specialist consultants across transport, ecology, landscape, heritage, flood risk, and many other disciplines. I'd like to place on record my sincere thanks to our planning policy team and all the officers involved. The professionalism, transparency, and sheer volume of work that has gone into this plan has been extraordinary, and I've witnessed that firsthand, particularly in the early stages of this plan. Indeed, I believe this council has gone significantly further than many authorities in explaining the process to residents. 30 public engagement events, thousands of consultation responses analysed, detailed evidence published, executive summaries, questions and answer documents, forthcoming non-technical summaries and FAQs all demonstrate a genuine commitment to openness throughout this process. And in fact, the fact that we haven't updated every single DIAC on the current state of the local plan is something that very, very few councils enter into at all. There has been criticism that members have somehow been expected to read over 7,000 pages of technical evidence before reaching a view. And I don't think that criticism is fair. The evidence base has been prepared by qualified professionals over many years. Those documents are published to ensure complete transparency and will remain available throughout the Regulation 19 consultation process as part of our evidence base. Like any major technical project, they contain executive summaries and updates precisely because nobody reasonably expects every member or resident to read every page on every single site. Our role is to understand the evidence, scrutinise the conclusions, ask challenging questions where appropriate, and ultimately decide whether the plan should proceed to independent examination. And that examination is another point worth making. This is not the end. Tonight is not the end of the process. If residents, parish councils or organisations believe the assessments are wrong, Regulation 19 is specifically the stage at which those representations should be made on planning grounds to the independent planning inspector. That inspector, not this cabinet, will determine whether this plan is legally compliant and sound. Finally, Chair, I would like to, actually, I do have a question to finish with, that picks up on something from DIAC. So one concern that came through quite strongly at DIAC, and particularly from colleagues representing Edenbridge Town, related to transport evidence and how local concerns about junction capacity and wider infrastructure will ultimately translate in delivery. So could officers therefore please explain for the benefits of members and people watching tonight how the infrastructure delivery plan is intended to operate alongside the local plan? And in particular, if they wouldn't mind using Edenbridge as an example, could you explain how issues identified through the transport evidence, such as junction modelling, mitigation measures, and future infrastructure interventions, move from technical assessment into actual delivery, and how residents can have confidence that infrastructure planning evolves alongside housing delivery rather than simply following behind it? And I think that would be a greater public understanding on all those points would assist us members as well. Thank you.
Councillor Thornton, thank you. Hopefully the officers managed to get all of that part of the question. I wouldn't be surprised if I asked you just to repeat some of that, but who's likely to take that?
Emma's going to start off on the IDP and then I'll move on to transport modelling. So we'll do a tag team.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just thinking of all parts of that question. So how the IDP is intended to operate alongside the local plan. The local plan sets out what development is proposed and where, and also includes very specific policies. So I'll just, to start with, it's worth guiding you to page 242 of your papers, which is our policy IN1, infrastructure delivery. The first part of that policy requires all new development to be supported by appropriate on and off-site infrastructure. And that infrastructure can either be identified through the infrastructure delivery plan or as advised by the infrastructure providers directly through planning application consultations. The IDP then sits alongside the local plan and it sets out what infrastructure is needed to support the growth, why it's needed, when it's likely to be required, and how it can be funded. So essentially showing that the development proposed through the local plan and the infrastructure needed to support it is deliverable in principle. So the two documents are designed to work together. The local plan establishes the growth, and then the IDP ensures that the supporting infrastructure is planned and deliverable. In terms of Edenbridge and the process that we would work through, and it's really appropriate because we had a meeting this morning with the transport consultants finalising the mitigation that's needed across the district. So the transport modelling is the evidence, and that identifies specific junctions, locations where added development is going to cause pressure, additional pressure on those junctions. Those technical findings then translate into mitigation projects. So that might be junction improvements, it might be upgrading signals, it might be walking and cycling facilities, or wider network interventions. And it's those mitigation projects that are then added into the IDP as specific infrastructure projects that are needed to support development. And that might be either because of a site-specific need, or that might be the cumulative impact of development like we have in Edenbridge. It's the cumulative impact of all the sites across Edenbridge that require mitigation at various junctions. and other infrastructure as well. I know at DIAC we talked about the provision of a new primary school, secondary school, expansion of healthcare provision, contribution towards new bus services, upgrades at the 2 train stations. So it's that cumulative impact of development. And that's really important for the IDP and the local plan, because we can't capture those needs arising from cumulative development when we just deal with planning applications. We can only consider what's in front of us. So that's a really great benefit of the local plan. We can consider the cumulative impact of development and secure better infrastructure that way. The mitigation measures are then added to the IDP, and that sets out when they're needed, the likely cost, and some of that information is still emerging, and I'll come on to that shortly. Who is responsible for delivering that infrastructure, and crucially the mechanism for securing them. So with transport improvements, we will be securing those through a Section 278 agreement, which is a legal agreement that ties the developer to deliver that piece of infrastructure directly in consultation with either KCC Highways or National Highways, whoever's responsible for that bit of road. And that means that the infrastructure gets delivered quicker, rather than providing a financial contribution that then sits with KCC or National Highways for a scheme to come along a few years down the line. It means that that piece of infrastructure is delivered. And the way that we can secure that is through planning conditions. So I'm trying to think of a recent one. So the Batten Ball improvements at the quarry development, we have a condition in that planning permission that says that those junction improvements must take place after I think it's the 150th dwelling has been built. So we can put in trigger points into planning conditions and into legal agreements that require the infrastructure projects to be delivered at certain point in time. So that gives you the certainty that the infrastructure will come alongside development rather than after it. And I suppose that means that infrastructure planning, by its very nature, is iterative. You know, I mentioned at DIAC that it's a forward-looking plan. It looks forward 15 years. We don't have all the answers yet. We don't know exactly when development is going to come forward. We don't know exactly what infrastructure providers' strategic programs are going to look like in 5-10 years' time, because they operate generally in 5-year cycles. So we put in what we know now and we review regularly. And so it's not a static list. It's a constantly evolving and improving list. As development comes forward at planning application stage, the infrastructure providers are reconsulted. And if there's a change, that is then noted in the IDP. But ultimately, it's the local plan policy that requires all development to be served by the infrastructure.
And then just to come back on a few of the specific queries about the highways modelling. So as you're aware, we have a cumulative transport model that we've developed in conjunction with Kent County Council, with Jacobs as well. There were a few questions at DIAC regarding specific junctions. I think M25 Junction 3 was discussed in relation to Pedham, and there was some confusion about whether this was on the National Highways 5-year programme. Just to be clear, that the junction improvements there are developer funded by the developer of Pedham Place, and so they are not. It's not a national highways scheme that has to be within the National Highways programme. It is a local plan scheme that is fully funded by the developer of Pedham Place. Also, in relation to Edenbridge, there was some confusion that, that there was just a focus on Hilders Lane specifically. We've clarified with the member that no, actually the reports that are published online set out a number of junctions in Edenbridge. And actually, as Emma mentioned, we met with National Highways this morning to discuss both the hotspots identified and the mitigation proposals, whether it's roundabouts, traffic lights, road calming, all the different options available. So as I said, the modelling has already been published, and before the Reg 19 publication on the 23rd of July, we will be publishing the final information to do with the mitigation proposals.
Please do.
Can I just say, I think that's probably the most detailed infrastructure delivery programme explanation I've ever had. And I found that extremely helpful. Thank you very much indeed, Emma. I think just, you know, some of the criticism I've had back from residents is, well, you know, we need this, we need that, and it's not costed. And it's like, well, actually, I'd rather they didn't cost it right now if it's not going to be delivered for another 15 years, because so much might have changed by then. But as you say, it's a live document. And I think it was actually very valuable. I'm glad I answered the question, actually, because I've personally found it very helpful, and I hope everybody else has as well. So I just wanted to, and also about the traffic stuff as well. So thank you, ladies.
Councillor Horwood.
Sorry.
I do apologise. Councillor Roy.
Thank you, Chairman. I just thought it'd be helpful to ask my question now before Councillor Horwood moves on. I agree with Councillor Lawson. That was an extremely helpful response. I thought it also might be helpful if Emma could perhaps explain how that process to secure developer-funded infrastructure for the cumulative impact of development going forward changes. The whole point of that really is how that changes when we do not have an up-to-date adopted local plan in place. That I think would be helpful.
A very good question. Sorry, Emma. That was over
No,
to you.
happy to. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll try not to repeat myself. But yeah, essentially having a plan is crucial if we want to deliver infrastructure across the district. And, we have to be realistic. This isn't infrastructure that's going to appear overnight. This is infrastructure that's going to be put in periodically through the local plan period. Some sites may not come forward for another 10, 15 years, but we have to plan for what's needed now and then review that at regular stages. Without that cumulative assessment of what's needed, and Edenbridge is a fantastic example where we wouldn't have been able to secure a new primary school or a secondary school, or improvements at the train stations or new bus services without considering that cumulative impact of development. And where we're without a plan and just relying on planning applications coming before us, we can only consider that specific development that's put before us. We can't consider what's happening next door or further up the road. And so you can take into consideration site-specific mitigation that might be required. So things like open space, affordable housing, obviously, and some access improvements, but it's very difficult, nigh on impossible, to secure the wider infrastructure that's needed to support the level of growth that's been proposed.
Thank you. That really underscores sort of some of the statements that we've been making as cabinet members. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the answer. Thank you for the question. Councillor Horwood, I cut you off in your prime. Over to you again.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, certainly I've got a couple of comments and then actually a few questions to ask of officers, as I sort of mentioned during the question time. When I first became a councillor in 2011, in planning policy, I remember the first application I ever dealt with was around a shed down a country lane being converted to a house in the Greenbelt. And I remember that was incredibly contentious at that time. And as we've seen planning policy become a lot more liberalised over the past sort of 15 years, and especially, sort of since, obviously since this government has taken place, with not just housing targets, we know the housing targets, colleagues have mentioned the increase that's happened, a 63% increase is dramatic, absolutely dramatic for us. And again, going back to 2011, we had a housing target of 165 homes per year, which was just over 2,500 over 15 years. We're being asked to deliver 17,460 homes over 15 years. Like, the jump is absolutely significant. And added to that housing target, as councillors have mentioned, we've gone from, we've had this whole downgrading of our green belt all across parts of our district, to grey belt, where the government has said it's now acceptable. They promised us it would just be petrol stations and disused brown land that would be built on. But actually, as they've clarified with the NPPF, and then obviously in February 2025, they clarified that Greenbelt wasn't safe around villages, and it certainly wasn't safe outside of national landscape at all, and that development was completely acceptable in those areas. We know with the housing targets as well, it's not just unmet need for our residents. We know that the London housing targets have spilled over into our housing targets. London's housing targets went down, and as a result, ours went up. That was a political decision again by the government, which has really hampered us with where we are now. I think we've clarified the points of the local plan, but if I can move on to the questions, that would be really helpful to clarify some of the points in the report. I guess I'll start with Broke Hill. So clarifying the status of this, and obviously it's highlighted in the documents as in a pending category. And it's pending, obviously, the planning application that was mentioned and the determination of that by the Development Management Committee. But if, and obviously we're only speaking on hypotheticals, if that were refused, for example, what would be the consequence of that in the local plan? Essentially, would it, would it not be considered by the planning inspector because our planning committee would have been clear that that was, for example, an unacceptable site? So I'll start with that one and then I'll go through.
Thank you. So yes, as set out in the papers, Broke Hill is included on a pending or provisional basis because as we're all aware, there is a live planning application. My understanding from my development management colleagues is that this is likely to be going to committee in August, so not too far away. Obviously, there are two options. If planning committee were to approve the development, it would then sit within the plan within what's called extants. So we are able to count sites that have planning permission or not yet built out in the extants category. So that's what that would happen. If if members were looking at refusing it, there is now a new process that central government has put in place where if schemes are more than 150 units or more, they are then called in by central government where a planning committee is looking to refuse that scheme, and then central government can look to determine that scheme at the national level. So if that was to happen, there would then the scheme would still remain to be pending until that process had reached fruition, until there was a determination. So we would need to see at the point of submission, which for us is Christmas, where the scheme is at. So is it still in that pending category? Is it still waiting to be determined by central government? Has it been approved by committee, or has, if the call-in has resolved, we will then obviously see that result. But it's sort of slightly looking into a crystal ball to know at what time scale that happens.
And just to follow up to that, so we would be able to be very clear, like through the submission, at the point of submission, if it hadn't been determined by the government whether they were going to call it in or not, and so thus allow us to refuse it. We would be able, as a district council, to be very clear to the inspector that this was not supported by members of this council.
Yes, absolutely. And as Councillor Grint mentioned in the introduction, we have had a meeting and have agreed some words to make it clear at this stage that the district council hasn't expressed a view on the suitability of the live planning application at this stage. So we will add additional wording into the plan as agreed with Councillor Williams to clarify that position.
My second question is around the Highways Authority and obviously the engagement with Kent County Council and actually National Highways as well. And obviously we've done transport modelling, and understand that has been reviewed by both authorities. And also that I understand that there's been workshops with Kent County Council Highways officers to go through each of the sites to understand, sort of whether they are accepting of, whether these are, in principle on highways grounds, acceptable in terms of what's proposed, in terms of access, in terms of road mitigation, and also cumulative impact. So looking at all the sites that are proposed, if they were all to come off tomorrow, that they would still feel that the mitigations they've suggested and that that the consultants have also highlighted would be acceptable. So they haven't at this stage objected to any of the sites. They've sort of said that in principle they are accepting of all of them.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we've worked very collaboratively with Kent County Council. So, we meet with them on a regular basis. In fact, we were meeting with them this morning along with National Highways. We have used their transport model. So the modelling is a Kent County Council model where we've plugged all these sites in. They're very much aware of all the sites. They provided us feedback through workshops as to kind of the accessibility, the sustainability, but no, they certainly haven't objected. They're working with us to understand what mitigation is required. But they're fully appraised and working with us to make sure that National Highways support the proposals as well.
Sorry, go on, sorry, Emma.
Sorry, I was just going to add, so as part of the site assessment process, so the Strategic Housing and Economic Land Availability Assessment, or the SHELAR, KCC Highways have had very early engagement with us on a site-by-site basis. So even pre the first Regulation 18 consultation, there's two elements in each site-specific SHELAR assessment, which is site access and site capacity. So they've had feedback into all of those site assessments, and there have been sites even before we consulted on them, which were ruled out on grounds that were raised by KCC Highways.
And just sort of following that up as well, like sort of, you know, obviously with infrastructure and infrastructure improvements, and actually Councillor Roy and Councillor Thornton touched upon it, you know, especially we've got large strategic sites, you know, and especially actually, you know, Pedham Place was, for example, mentioned, you know, so how do we ensure that, you know, bearing in mind the time it will take to upgrade the infrastructure? Like I know at Pedham, they are proposing expanding the capacity of Junction 3 on the motorway. That's not an overnight piece of work. How do we ensure that, you know, sort of that we can achieve that, you know, sort of early on, rather than, you know, Pedham Place potentially gets built out and then suddenly the developer starts engaging with build it, and then we've got a significant lag of a significant infrastructure project, you know, to increase capacity to cater not just for that, but the others.
Yeah, that's a really important point. So the Junction 3 improvements that you've mentioned are listed as a key project in the infrastructure delivery plan with a high priority. So we will secure those through the planning permission that will come with Pedham Place. KCC Highways, National Highways are key stakeholders and will be consulted on that, but we know already that they're already on board with those improvements, so deliverability is high. Through that planning permission, we will secure the Junction 3 improvements through a planning condition and a legal agreement, which will have trigger points. So it's, as I mentioned earlier, it's quite usual for transport improvements. You can build the first 100 homes without much improvement, and then you will start having trigger points around when junction arrangements and junction improvements come in. So that ensures, again, that infrastructure it comes along with development rather than after it.
If I may, just to use a local example, so the Baton Ball roundabout that comes through as part of the quarry scheme, I believe the trigger point there is 150 homes. So there becomes a point where it is necessary for that infrastructure to come on stream. But with some infrastructure, early isn't always best. I know, Councillor Williams, we talked about schools before. Actually, if they're delivered too early on the site, before perhaps people have actually moved into a development, sometimes they get full with people from outside the site, so that by the time that people move all onto the development, they're then full. So there is a kind of a right point for all these different types of infrastructure in terms of the phasing of that delivery.
Okay, no, that's really helpful. Thank you. Another question just around local government reorganisation. So we find out possibly next week what happens in terms of local government reorganisation, and just more of a technical question of, you know, that some people have said, you know, what's the point of doing a local plan if you're all going to be scrapped and you're all going to be merged together? You know, my understanding, and I think I've asked this question before, is that obviously having a local plan will mean that that development framework, the plan and policies within our local plan, will be used to determine planning applications within our district until such time as the Unitary Authority develops its own local plan, but then obviously goes through the elongated process of eventually getting to the planning inspector and getting it approved. So that our local plan, if approved, would be you know, the development framework that's used to determine until such time as, you know, 5, 10, 15, 20 years in the future, as the Unitary gets to that point of its own local plan and it being adopted as well.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. No, it's our local plan, once unitarisation happens, would be in place, no doubt, for many years. The reality is, if we are joining up with Tunbridge and Malling and Tunbridge Wells has recently adopted their plan. Tunbridge Malling is tracking along the same trajectory. They hope to have their plan, their Reg 19 out in September and submitted by the end of the year too. So it's important locally for each of the authorities to have articulated their priorities, the sites to take forwards, the areas to be protected, the infrastructure to support that growth. And yes, that plan will transport through into the new authority with the new geography, and it may be years or even decades before that that new plan is in place for that new area. I mean, this plan is for 15 years. It could well be 15 years hence before that new plan comes on stream.
And just as a sort of final follow-up on that point, like, so, you know, two of the local authority, if we get a West Kent model, obviously depending on what the outcome is by national government next week, if we got a West Kent model, so two of them already have adopted local plans, so they're obviously safe. Tunbridge and Malling obviously are developing the same time as us, and, you know, sort of aiming to submit. you know, if for example, we have that local government reorganisation and we don't have a local plan, we don't make it over the mark, or we delay it to the point where we don't have a local plan, you know, is it possible for development to come forward, whereas obviously the other two have clearly said what sites should and shouldn't be developed? If there is unmet housing need in either of those council areas, presumably as a new unitary, that could actually be forced upon us because we have no local plan, not just in terms of housing, but things like gypsy and traveller sites as well.
Yeah, that could be a potential risk if we haven't got a plan in place.
No, thank you, Chairman. I think, you know, it highlights the difficulty that we are in and the risks, you know, of not having a local plan. You know, we've highlighted the 400 sites that have not been taken forward, that are in the green belt, many of them in the national landscapes as well. And I think, you know, sort of colleagues have mentioned about the, you know, the real possibility, and officers have mentioned about the real possibility of government intervention. You know, if we don't have a local plan, the ability, as they've done with other councils, to allocate sites. So where councils have actually tried to exclude sites, the government inspectors, because they haven't met their housing need, have inserted sites and instructed them to insert sites, and also dictated the number of houses on those sites. You know, so I think the you know, the final question really with Hannah is very striking, and obviously we await the outcome of next week in terms of what you know, our future looks like. But clearly, you know, with Tunbridge Wells and Maidstone having adopted local plan, and you know, Tunbridge obviously also trying to adopt one urgently, you know, if we don't have a plan to protect unallocated sites, you know, there is a severe risk to our residents in Sevenoaks district that we could become the dumping ground for even larger numbers of housing and more other sites that are going to be unsuitable. You know, not just by the other local authorities that will naturally act parochially. They've got their local plan in place. I don't think councillors from those areas will be advocating for more building in their area, but they'll say, well, look at the area that doesn't have a local plan. And as we know in National Planning Policy Framework, if you don't have an up-to-date local plan, you are a fair game for developers, as we have experienced. You know, at the planning committee, the development management committee, we've had so many applications, you know, come forward that where we've talked about the tilted balance, we've talked about the fact that, you know, the last local plan was rejected, and thus we have no local plan to date. I think whilst, you know, I think everyone's made clear, none of us welcome, you know, the significant number of houses imposed upon us. And, you know, sort of with having no local plan opens us up to more unlimited and unplanned developments. And that 17,460 houses that the government is forcing on us becomes a minimum rather than a maximum if we don't have a local plan in place, especially in the context of local government reorganisation. So, you know, you know, it is a very difficult decision. You know, sort of none of us like, you know, sort of the proposed level of housing, you know, that's come forward. But with the local plan, we are protecting our residents against future and unwanted development, especially in the years to come. With local government reorganisation.
Councillor Horwood, thank you. Your commentary, question and summation. Are there any other comments or questions from the Cabinet? Councillor Williams.
Yeah, Chairman, thanks. Just to sum up, really, I just think, I hope now that our public, enraged as they are with what it looked like on the surface, understand the jeopardy we're under here. And some councillors, some new councillors, I hope they are seen now as using their brains, being knowledgeable, trying to stop the jeopardy. They still can be against the sites in their wards. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But they see the big future. They see the overall picture, and it's not easy. It's complicated, and people voting to get this through are actually being quite courageous, and I commend them. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you. Cabinet, there is I'll be very diplomatic with my wording here. There are many years of experience sitting on the front bench before me. Some of you have sat on the DMC. Some sit on the DIAC. All of you are aware of previous incarnations, the local plan, the process, the discussions, the decision making. I don't think any of us, even 2 years ago, would have been sitting here looking at a totally different horizon. This hasn't just been tinkering on the edges with what is the, forgive me for referring to it as the Bible of planning, the NPPF, major and substantial overhauls which has dramatically changed our modus operandi into what we can and cannot legitimately object to or refuse. It's not easy, and I don't think any of us, and I will widen that not just to members of the cabinet, but to any resident who stepped up to become a councillor, stepped up to put themselves into a position like this, where you're sort of being forced into a corner by a system that's quite clearly been centralised bit by bit. However, you've stepped up to the plate. You've had the recommendation from DIAC. You've heard the officers' reports and their answers to the questions you've put this evening. And if there are no further questions, and if there are no other issues you wish to raise, the recommendation to Cabinet is in two parts. That Cabinet A agrees the Regulation 19 proposed submission version of the local plan attached to Appendix A be published 23rd of July to the 17th of September 2026, and B, delegates authority to the Deputy Chief Executive and Corporate Director of Planning and Regulatory Services, following consultation with the Development and Infrastructure Portfolio Holder, to finalise any non-policy text changes required in the draft local plan prior to publication. And I see a show of support for that recommendation. Thank you very much. Thank you. That recommendation is carried.
Chairman, could I request a short break whilst...
You read my mind. I've just checked the clock. Yes, I shouldn't undermine the efforts put in by my colleagues sitting to my right on the next three agenda items. I think I'll be fairly accurate if I said they probably won't run as long as that last meeting. So please, yes, if you'd like to be back at 8:30, and we'll resume there. Thank you.
Chairman, may I also ask that we turn the aircon off? It's
Okay, it is now 20:32. Apologies for the slight tardy restart to the second part of the cabinet meeting. But we move on to agenda item 6, which is the private sector housing enforcement policy. So this report, sorry, before I hand over to the officer, this report presents the draft private sector housing enforcement policy to go out for consultation. The council aims to ensure that all properties let as residential homes across the Sevenoaks district, including those in private ownership, are safe, well managed and of a high standard. The Renters' Rights Act 2025 introduces new landlord legislation designed to make renting in the private sector fairer and safer. The private sector housing enforcement policy sets out what owners, landlords, agents and tenants can expect from the council in ensuring effective compliance with housing legislation. It explains how the council will uphold standards while minimising unnecessary burdens on the council, residents, landlords and businesses. The current private sector housing enforcement policy was adopted in 2021. The current policy details how the council will use its enforcement powers relating to legislation covering housing standards and issues regarding public health affecting poor housing conditions only, and does not apply to mobile and park homes. As set out in the Housing Strategy 2022 to 2027, Theme 4, Healthy People, Homes and Places, the council's objective is to identify the most effective interventions to improve conditions in private sector housing. To meet this objective, the council is working to improve the conditions of the homes let by private landlords, including taking enforcement action when necessary. For the 3-year period 2025 to 2028, the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government is providing new burdens funding to local housing authorities to help fund the costs of implementing and enforcing the Renters' Rights Act 2025. The Ministry has made clear its expectation that ongoing costs will be offset through income generated from civil penalties issued to landlords who breach relevant legislation, alongside fee income derived from the operation of the private rented sector database. The draft private sector housing enforcement policy will go through a consultation process. Surveys, meetings and focus groups will be held with councillors, partners, stakeholders and residents to get their views between the 17th of July 2026 and the 30th of August 2026. That's my introduction to you, to give you an overview. I will now hand over to Alison to give you a slightly deeper dive into the subject.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say I think you've given a very comprehensive opening to the report. One thing I just want to clarify from the report that was came out with the papers is the change in the consultation period so that it covers a 6-week period, the minimum period for consultation. In respect of the policy, it is a change in operational processes in how we will deal with cases in the private rented sector. With the changes in legislation through the Renters' Rights Act, it does mean now that we're going to have to take formal action sooner than what we would do currently. And detailed on page 305 of your papers, it shows where we've taken both informal and formal action. And we always prefer, as so to speak, as the Sevenoaks way, to try and work with people, engage with the landlords to get repairs completed, negotiate and mediate between landlord and tenant. So this is a change in the fact that we will have to issue civil penalties a lot sooner than what we would do currently. And we do have to complete a government return to show that we are issuing civil penalties. So the policy has been rewritten to meet the requirements of the Renters' Rights Act, to make sure that we can provide good quality, safe and well-managed houses in the private rented sector, and the council can adhere to the Renters' Rights Act. Thank you.
Alison, thank you. I can't help feeling a little bit uneasy when the government start expecting you to become, if you like, self-sufficient, and then they want returns to show how many fines were issued. It just, I don't know, I have echoes of parking tickets and civil enforcement and things, and you're right, I'd hate to see us lose the Sevenoaks way, which has been very effective over the years. However, we are where we are. Legislation changes, and we're forced to move with the times. But thank you for the report that's been submitted to us this evening, and thank you for your overview. Members, are there any questions you'd like to put to the officer?
Chairman Allison's already answered my question. So, and very reassuring to hear that we don't have a high level of rogue landlords in the district as well. But thank you for the report. I thought that was all the reports have been very comprehensive, including your own, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Never go to an auction, Councillor Dyball. You moved your hand and I thought you're indicating to speak. I'll take it, you know, question. Councillor Horwood.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just really a question around, obviously, you know, we're being encouraged to give more civil penalties, you know, sort of for, you know, sort of poor rented accommodation, and obviously for the, you know, the breakage of, you know, the responsibilities of private landlords. I'm actually in favour of that. I think, you know, sort of there's a lot of people who don't understand their rights, and I think where landlords, you know, sort of don't keep their properties in a suitable state. So I do welcome a lot of the provisions under the Renters' Rights Act. I guess my question was around, obviously, you know, potentially if there are an increase in the number of fines we're issuing to enforce the Renters' Rights Act, you know, have you considered that, you know, sort of how you can use that money to potentially reinvest in the service? Like, have you done any analysis of, you know, like, you know, what that could look like in terms of, you know, I don't want to use the term revenue, but money that could then potentially fund another officer to further ensure that, you know, sort of renters' rights are being protected?
Okay, thank you for the question. Since I've been here in August 2022, we haven't taken any court action or issued any civil penalties because of the way we operate on the informal basis. I think it's going to be very difficult for me to say how much I think we can generate from this. With the new burdens funding, we've currently got 2 officers. So we've got a senior private sector housing officer for renters' rights, and we've got a private sector housing intelligence officer, because they're going to deal with the database, making sure we've got all the information on the landlords, so that if we've got landlords out there without an EPC, we can go and be more proactive towards those cases. So I think until we get to the point of having the database, having the information, and seeing what the situation is, because we don't get a high number of rogue landlords in the district. And it's when you look at houses in multiple occupation, we've only got 22 licensed houses in multiple occupation in the district. I do think there's more than that, but through this and the Renters' Rights Act and this proactive approach, we'll hopefully be able to identify more. And then that's when I'll be able to possibly 6 months in, maybe to once we've got the database, we'll be able to see maybe if there's trends. But until that, I think it's very difficult for me to be able to say, this is how much money we're going to get. But for reinvestment, once the new burdens money's gone, any civil penalties would go into keep the posts that we have.
Sorry, just a follow-up question. Sorry, Chairman. Yeah, so in that vein, yeah, bearing in mind sort of what you said, and it sounded like there potentially may be a lower level of income than sort of necessarily maybe envisaged, but presumably as well, we may consider that we could, you know, through the In Shape magazine, highlight, you know, sort of what the Renters' Rights Act means for tenants. You know, we do have a lot of people in private rented accommodation, and, you know, I'm sure many of them don't know, you know, what the new laws are. So I wonder whether it's something we may consider in the In Shape, just to help our residents aware of, you know, their increased rights. Yeah,
thank you. We have done we have done a newsletter for landlords, so landlords understand their rights. But we've also already put it in the In Shape. But we try to put something in every time if we can to highlight the issues in relation to this and the changes, and we will continue to do so. And we've also got leaflets that the landlord liaison officer can use to explain the differences and the rights now from what a landlord and a tenant has got, that Stephen's teams hand out as and when anybody obviously approaches us.
Thank you, Alison. Cabinet look fairly happy with the report and the way forward. So if I put to Cabinet the recommendation as per your papers, recommendation is called A, but there is only one recommendation: to approve the draft of the private sector housing enforcement policy for public consultation subject to any required amendment. Are we happy to do so? Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda, which I believe is agenda item 7, thank you, is the tenancy strategy. So this report presents the review and draft of the tenancy strategy 2026 to 2031. Under the Localism Act 2011, all local authorities are required to prepare and publish a tenancy strategy. The strategy provides guidance to registered providers on the types of tenancy they should grant, the circumstances in which they should be offered, and the approach to tenancy renewal and termination. The tenancy strategy helps the council and registered providers prioritise households in greatest need, reduce under-occupation, support downsizing, and ensure adapted properties are used appropriately. This ensures that stock is allocated and managed in a way that maximises its social value. The Renters' Rights Act, the registered providers should have regard to these changes when reviewing and implementing their tenancy policies, ensuring alignment with new requirements relating to improved tenant information standards, strengthened rights to challenge decisions, enhanced property conditions obligations, and updated processes for tenancy variation and redress. The Council will continue to monitor the impact of the Act and work collaboratively with registered providers to update the tenancy strategy, ensuring that local practice remains compliant, fair, and responsive to the evolving national regulatory framework. The Renters' Rights Act will not apply to flexible tenancies until a formal direction has been issued by the housing regulator and consultation has taken place on the tenancy standards required for implementation. In relation to the tenancy strategy consultation, the draft tenancy strategy 2026 to 2031 will go through a consultation process. Surveys, meetings and focus groups will be held with councillors, partners, stakeholders and residents to get their views between, you're already ahead of me here, the 17th of July 2026 and the 30th of August 2026. That's my introduction, and again I'll hand over to Alison to see if she wants to add any detail.
Thank you, Chair. No, I don't want to add any detail. I think you've given a comprehensive response, intro to the report. The only thing again is making sure that it's a 6-week consultation like the previous report. And just to say, once the Renters' Rights Act comes in force for registered providers, we will need to review the tenancy strategy again. And it might be the fact that there won't be flexible tenancies, there might not be a need for one. So again, it depends on what the changes in the legislation at that point in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Do any members have any further questions? No. Okay. Sorry, Alison, but I know it's been a long evening for you, but thank you. So the recommendation to Cabinet as per page 435, again, it's shown as recommendation A, but there's only one, and that is to approve the draft of the tenancy strategy for public consultation, subject to any required amendment. Can I have a show of hands for support? That's fine, carried. Almost finally, agenda item 8, the homelessness and rough sleeper strategy review. Local housing authorities have a statutory duty to publish a homelessness and rough sleeper strategy every 5 years. The existing strategy was adopted by Council on the 21st of February 2023. This report brings forward a review together with the proposed new 5-year strategy and associated action plan. It reflects the latest national policy context, including the government's national plan to end homelessness, the Homelessness Reduction Act 2017, the Domestic Abuse Act 2021, and the phased implementation of the Renters' Rights Act 2025. Our priorities remain focused on 3 connected themes. 1, prevention, delivering high quality advice, early intervention and targeted pathways for those most at risk. 2, intervention, working with partners to tackle rough sleeping, improve temporary accommodation and coordinate responses for people with complex needs. And 3, sustainable solutions, expanding move-on and rehousing options and providing support that helps people maintain tenancies. Progress will be reviewed through annual monitoring of the action plan and assessed against both local performance measures and the national plan's headline metrics: reductions in long-term rough sleeping, fewer households entering and remaining in temporary accommodation, and improved sustained housing outcomes. The council continues to face challenges. These include the rising cost of living, contributing to financial insecurity, rent arrears, and higher homelessness risk, ongoing pressure on temporary accommodation and the need to reduce emergency placements while improving standards and value for money, private rented sector affordability, including reduced numbers of properties at or below local housing allowance, and increasing presentations linked to domestic abuse and the need for sufficient safe accommodation and specialist support. The draft Homelessness and Rough Sleeper Strategy 2026 to 2031 will go through a consultation process. Surveys, meetings and focus groups will be held with councillors, partners, stakeholders and residents to get their views between, you're there, the 17th of July 2026 and the 30th of August 2026. And with that, I'm not sure. It could be Alison, it could be Steve. I think I'm going to go for Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I have nothing further to add from your comprehensive introduction. Just to confirm, obviously, the consultation period is the same as with the tenancy strategy and the private sector housing enforcement policy.
Thank you very much. Any fingers poised over the microphones? Councillor Dyball.
I just feel so sorry that poor Stephen has sat there for 2 hours and we haven't got a question for him.
Well, why have you sat there for 2 hours,
But
Stephen?
that's a good thing, because these reports are so comprehensive that I truly can't find anything to ask. It's been set out so well. So thank you very much for that, both of you. You know, you do a great job with your reports. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Alison and Stephen, unless there are any further questions, I'm taking it from the non-verbal that there are not. Testament to the previous work you've put forward for the advisories of the report you put forward to the Cabinet this evening, and let's hope we get some good consultations undertaken and engagement with all stakeholders. And thank you very much for your time this evening. Sorry it's a little bit later perhaps than you would have hoped, but have a safe journey home. Thank you. Cabinet, the recommendation as of page 449, as before, just one recommendation shown as A on your page, to approve the draft of the Homelessness and Rough Sleeper Strategy for public consultation, subject to any required amendment. Can I have a show of hands for those in support? That's carried. Thank you very much. I believe, words you'd like to hear, that concludes the business for this evening. Thank you for your engagement in what was a